Welcome to the Corporate Director Podcast, where we discuss the experiences and ideas behind what's working in corporate board governance in our digital tech-fueled world. Here, you'll discover new insights from corporate leaders and governance researchers with compelling stories about corporate governance, strategy, board culture, risk management, digital transformation, and more.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Corporate Director Podcast, the voice of modern governance. My name is Dottie Schindlinger, Executive Director of the Diligent Institute, and I'm joined once again by my amazing co-host, Megan Day, Principal Solution Designer at Diligent. Megan, how are you doing today?
Well, Dottie, we are recording this in full disclosure the day prior to the U.S. General election. So, yeah, there's that.
So, really easy to get other work done, really easy to concentrate on other things besides electoral politics. And by the way, Megan, I live in Pennsylvania, and I got to tell you, at this point, whatever happens, I cannot wait for it to be over because the number of ads that I am subjected to on a minutely basis is really kind of astounding. Honestly, I have never received this many texts in my life from political parties and candidates. And I swear that there's like 3 minutes of programming for every 30 minutes of political ads on television in this area. It's really kind of astounding.
Yeah, and my family lives in Pennsylvania, so I had that experience a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, I realized what a bubble I am in New York. And we could certainly, I think, spend a lot of time on both sides, saying pros, cons, what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. But we'll leave that to the pundits and Steve, what's his face, who I'm sure will be up all night working on his analysis here for us. But yeah, it certainly, I think regardless of what happens, it will be an interesting couple of weeks, couple of months here in the United States as this all pans out.
Well, Megan, it reminds me of this article I was just reading over the weekend in Harvard Business Review about just kind of this bizarre, unpredictable time that we are living in. And how do you lead your team when the future feels completely unpredictable? And just the way that they described it, the very first sentence just so caught me. Right now, many of us feel suspended between what once was and what is yet to come. And they talk about this as a liminal experience, this kind of prolonged separation from normal. And boy, does that just feel so true. And how do you help coach and lead a team if you're on a board? How do you show up and be present for your CEO and for your management team when your job as a director is to see around the corner and you have no idea what is coming around the corner? None of us do. And whatever it is probably going to be dramatic and major, and you can try to get as ready as you possibly can and know deep in your heart it's not going to be enough. So it's really an interesting time that we are living and leading in.
Yeah, for sure. And it makes me think, you just saying that aloud. I think post pandemic, there was a lot of chatter about returning to normalcy. And rather than acceptance of the world is just wildly different than it was before. And even then, I still feel like maybe I'm just even coming into my own rhythm of sort of life before March 2020 and life and work, after that.
Well, I think that's a really good segue, Megan, to listen to the interview that we recorded for today. I had the opportunity to speak with Christine Heckart, who's the founder and CEO of a company called Xapa, which is spelled Xapa. She tells me it's the Greek word for joy, which I think is fabulous. And we had a really good conversation about this reality that we're living in, that study after study is showing that employees all up and down the chain feel very disengaged. There are the highest levels of disengagement at work that have ever been measured, ever. And that is really noteworthy and something that boards maybe need to wrap their arms around and understand as an area of enterprise risk. So I was really glad to get a chance to speak with her.
Well, I can't wait, Jody. I am a child of a organizational behavior psychologist. So this is right up my alley. Let's give it a listen.
Joining us on the Corporate Director podcast today is Christine Heckart, founder and CEO of Xapa, a company that has a scalable app for employees' personal and professional development. Christine is also a board member at SciTime and Contentful. Christine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, I've just rattled off a couple of the things that you do, but there's a lot more to your background than that. So, I wondered if you could maybe give us a bit more well rounded introduction to the kind of work that you're doing.
I've spent 35 years in the tech industry. I've been at large companies and very small. Most of my personal career is in go to market, being a CMO or general manager. I've also been a CEO. I've sat on about half a dozen boards, public and private. I'm part of the Berkeley Haas School of Business Next Gen Directors Academy, which teaches board governance, and I'm both on that board and faculty. And one of my big beliefs after the 35 years is in the conscious capitalism movement, that as directors, as leaders, it's in our shareholders' best interests. And in order to truly maximize shareholder value, the best path to do that is to optimize outcomes for all stakeholders, including employees and partners and the world and communities, suppliers, etc. So when I sold my last company, I started a new company, and the mission of that new company is really about how we uplift companies generally and their employee base to fulfill their missions and to fulfill this broader mission of capitalism, but in a much more conscious way.
I love that. You know, there has been so much conversation in the last few years about changing dynamics of work. I mean, I really think about the pandemic as almost the crucible of when we all started to really talk about this issue of what makes a great work experience, what makes a great work environment, and what does work environment even mean if we're all remote or hybrid? So I wondered if you could share your perspectives a little bit on the why of how work has evolved. So why is work evolving? And then especially sort of in the context of not just the pandemic, but also the shifting demographics and some of the shifting norms and desires of different generations. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that question because I actually do a talk called The Changing Why of Work because it has changed so much. And the demographics, as you point to, are a part of that reason. 2 out of every 3 workers by the end of next year will be millennial or Z, 68%. So that's a big number. And if you look at Gallup's recent data, disengagement has hit all-time highs. And that's not just for the young people, by the way. That's across all age groups. I think, the Gen Z, which I'm part of, post-pandemic, we want and expect very different things from our work environment than what we were willing to accept post-pandemic. But we've got this huge disengagement problem. Gallup numbers, the average employee reports being productive for about 5 hours a day. And when I speak to CEOs and board directors, I always ask them, how much do you think they're productive before I give that number? And the typical answer from board members and CEOs is 3 hours. So there's a big disconnect here with how much people are working and how much we think they're working. Gallup numbers, the disengagement is costing 9% of global GDP. That would make it the 3rd largest economy in the world after the US and China. And by the way, that's the same number, 8.8 trillion annually in lost productivity, that equates to the cost of all cybercrime combined each year. And we think about how much time, money, and energy goes into cybercrime, and here we are with this massive problem that is fully within our control as leaders. And this is one of the things that I personally love is we hate things that are outside of our control. You can't control somebody else's work ethic, but it's really not about that. It's more about our ethics at work. And you pointed in your question to this question of where. And where's probably an important question, but it takes all the oxygen out of the room, and it's probably not the most important question. What is the work? How is the work getting done? Especially in the age of AI, that's changing a lot. And I think the most important question is why? Why do people work? Why do they give that extra effort and, think about problems in their off time and go the extra mile with internal and external customers? Why do people work? And if you think about, if you're listening to this, you're a corporate director, you're very successful, you probably love your work. So think about that why. There's a lot of great research that shows that the why of work has changed pretty dramatically over the last 150 years, from very transactional when we were going to the factories and the mines, through a phase where we loved our work, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, post war. But fast forward to today, and love is no longer enough. There has to be more to it. And I think that's the root cause of some of the problems that we're all facing.
So you laid out a bunch of really important challenges that companies are having to deal with. I'd love to hear your thoughts about, really, if keeping employees engaged and productive and tenured is kind of the name of the game, and that's what we're all kind of trying to achieve. What are some of the biggest barriers to making that happen? Why is this so hard? Why are these challenges so persistent?
Such a great question. And frankly, I don't believe it has to be hard, but I do think there's a big gap in understanding. In researching this and spending 100% of my time in the last more than 3 years now on this topic, one of my many conclusions is that employers and employees want the same things. We just use different words and we come at it from kind of a different point of view. Employees today, especially younger employees, millennials and Zs, 44 and below, they want to be aligned with higher purpose, their own and the company's, and their values. And they really desire to learn and grow through their work experience, not just professionally, but also personally. This ascension of self is what we all studied as self actualization, Maslow's hierarchy. But we were taught, at least I remember being taught coming up through high school and college, that, over the long course of your life, you ascended, you became self aware and self actualized. And towards the end of your life, kind of after you were going into retirement, you would start to live into your greater purpose and you'd be so fulfilled that you could start giving to others. You will have developed EQ over that time period. And, then we're really our true best self. And if you look at the research, and John Levy, who's a behavioral scientist out of the East Coast, New York City area, he's done some really fascinating work. And one key to his findings is that young people aren't willing to wait to move up that hierarchy. They want to live into purpose and values coming out of college. They understand the importance of EQ and they want the chance to become their best self now. They also expect, and this is maybe the biggest shift, they expect their full time employer to help them do that, to help them learn and grow, not just in the hard skills, but in the soft skills. And the soft skills, ironically, are way harder to learn than the hard skills. But one of the things, when I'm talking to directors and executives about this, most of us came into the industries that we're in last century. And when you came out of school and joined a big company, you got scads of training and development in everything from personal hygiene to how to have a conversation. But since the turn of the century, all of that has really gone away. Even big companies don't invest in that anymore, except maybe at the very top percentiles of their companies. And this is one of the things that's creating a really big gap, both in how employees behave versus our expectations, and also what they want that we're not giving them.
So this is a really interesting conversation. I'd love to go a little bit deeper into some of the things that motivate people to engage or become disengaged at work. I think a lot of leaders maybe have some misconceptions there about what is going to motivate an employee to be more loyal, to be more productive. What do employees actually want from their employers?
Certainly, every person is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to be generalizing here. But my conclusion is that what we want from them and what they want from us is the same thing in the end. We each want you to be your best self and to bring that person to work every day and to be fully engaged. That's what we want as employers, and that's also what employees want. Zappa has taken to calling this idea conscious currencies, because what employees want to be paid in is not just money. In fact, we've all seen examples in our own families, maybe for ourselves, certainly in the people we know, where people of all ages are consciously taking less money so they can live where they want to live, do the work they want to do, and do it in the way they want to do it. So obviously, something is more important than money. And I think we've known that forever. HR people for a long time have said currency, cash currency, is not the most important thing to attract or motivate an employee. That's a statement of fact. All of us who are board members, we work for a lot more than just the money. It's for the joy of it. So if we can tap into the why of work for each person, we as employers can unleash enormous potential. We talked about that 9%. Imagine dropping 9% to your bottom line, even half of that. We talked about the status quo of people literally not working, maybe putting in 5 hours a day, not being engaged. 68% of employees either actively looking for a new job or considering doing so. Imagine if you can improve that by 5, 10, 30, 50%. With those numbers, we could improve it 50% and still have room. So money's not the most important thing. How do we truly engage these people? The wheel of conscious currencies is to help people understand the higher purpose of your company. Hopefully, you have one. Help people understand how their purpose and their values align with their daily work. They can figure that out. You can help them figure that out. But when they make that connection, they're much more likely to work harder and be more engaged. You can create conscious culture, so a culture of appreciation for people. And that doesn't mean not holding a high bar. In fact, conscious cultures often have higher bars because you're willing to have tough conversations, but you're doing it through the lens of compassion, helping somebody grow and improve, helping the business grow and improve. Because ultimately, if you dig into John Levy's work, that's what people are looking for. They want the opportunity to grow and learn professionally, yes, but also personally. Their personal growth mindset and self-awareness and resilience and communication skills, all the stuff that, we used to be taught and we really aren't taught in schools or in business anymore. And that's what they want. Now, they also want the chance for good mental and physical health at work. They're not willing to sacrifice their personal mental or physical health or relationships with their families like maybe some of us were in the 80s and the 90s. But if we can give them these conscious currencies and this more conscious culture, we can tap into that why of work. And I've seen it myself. It can just unleash massive improvements, productivity, potential, innovation, accountability, loyalty, all the things we want from the people we already have in the business.
So, given that companies always are facing constraints in terms of growth and resources and trying to figure out where to make the best investments, do you have some recommendations for how companies can make smart choices on investing in personal professional development in ways that are going to have the greatest impact? And where should they be really focusing their resources given these realities?
Right. Some of this stuff doesn't cost any money. It's like I said, it's about appreciation. Those are words that you don't have to appreciate people in monetary ways. Having respectful cultures, listening to their ideas, helping them align to higher purpose and values. Those don't cost anything, but they do take executives all the way down to the manager level who know how to have these kinds of conversations and who know how to have the tougher conversations about how to help people improve. Ultimately, what we need to do as businesses and as directors is invest in growing the people who grow the business. The grass isn't greener on the other side. It's greener where you water it. And if you look at the Gen Zs, they are the most transient generation in history, modern history. They change jobs more often, more quickly than any other generation at their same age levels. And it's not because of money. It's because when they go into a company, they don't feel like that company is investing in them, caring about them as a person. That doesn't cost any money, and investing in them. And that doesn't have to cost a lot of money. But when they don't feel like they're being invested in and they're not growing personally and professionally, they switch jobs. They think the grass is going to be greener. Of course, it isn't. It because the next company isn't doing it either. So for me, it's more than just throwing a little bit of money, investing in some corporate development for the CEO and the CEO's staff. That gets done all the time, but it doesn't trickle down. It doesn't move the needle. If we can invest in uplifting everybody, investing in everybody, then we can really tap into this why of work and unleash all of that potential and innovation and accountability I talked about. Now, that is why I started Xapa. I'm building the app. And, when I was CEO of my last company, I wanted to do this. I had a company of almost all engineers. If anybody needed, to learn and teach EQ and how to have conversations and communicate and build relationships and mutual trust and all of that, we needed that. I wanted it top to bottom. God knows when I came into the industry in my 20s, I really needed it. I rolled out new products, and if you got in my way, I kind of just rolled you over. So I'm building the app that I wish I could have used in my youth. I wish I would have had for employees. And my goal is to make it so affordable that there's no reason for people not to do it. Now, it doesn't matter in my mind whether you use something like Xapa or you do something else. And like I said before, it doesn't even have to cost money. But we do have to provide something other than just some videos for people to watch, because this is truly about rewiring brains, and it's about building muscle memory for things like resilience and EQ and growth mindset. And you can't build muscle watching videos of somebody else lift weights. You have to do the work yourself. But I can tell you that after all of the leadership development that I've done personally over 35 years, and I've had a lot of it, and some of it's been absolutely fantastic, my brain has been rewired in the last 3 years just by this practice motion, a couple minutes a day, that really does start to rewire your automatic responses, not just your conscious responses. So, my belief is we need to teach courageous and empathetic leadership, and anybody can be a leader. It's not just about what's at the top. We do need to have leaders at the top of companies who are courageous and empathetic, but leadership happens top to bottom in an organization, and most companies have a shortage of leadership. And as governors, that's what we need to look out for, because that's the future of the company. So how do we engage our people, the ones we have today? How do we get more money out of what is probably our number one expense item, the people? And these aren't just resources, they're humans. And if we can tap into their why of work, we can solve a great majority of the problems that we're dealing with and grow the business. One thing that we've seen directly in our research is we know that businesses are all about growth, but it turns out our people are all about growth as well. And those two things are intricately tied. So if we can grow the people that grow the business itself will grow. And this is something that is entirely within our control as leaders.
I want to pick up on a thread that you just mentioned, and that is, what's kind of the role of the board versus the role of management here? Because a lot of the things you're mentioning, I would say probably belong more to the management than to the board, but there is clearly a role for the board to play. So, how can boards really ensure this work is happening and support management as they try to transform the company in this way? What's the role of the board?
Yep, noses in, fingers out. Measure and inspect, ask. Most companies, there's very little time, money, energy spent developing and growing the people who grow the business. What energy, time, and money is spent is at the top of the company. And it's not that that's not important. Of course it is. But you can't just have a couple day-long seminars and think that that solves the problem, because it doesn't trickle down. So we really have to inspect what is happening to grow all of the people in the business. They're our number one expense. And one reason I think this doesn't happen is traditional solutions are pretty expensive and they don't scale well. So, if I'm going to go get a coach for everybody, one, that's an expensive proposition. Two, it's inconsistent because not everybody has the same coaches. And as CEOs and board members, we want to create cultures. We want to have certain behaviors and values and frameworks by which everybody is operating. We need to shared vocabulary, a shared vernacular. If you and I are the only two people that speak English, then we're having this great conversation. Nobody else benefits. But when you create frameworks and vernacular and common language for everybody in the company around what you expect, and you're investing in them as you're doing this, now we create a network effect. And everybody who joins into this common framework creates value for everybody else. And that's how you really unleash this massive innovation and productivity gain. And, this sounds like the right thing to do. And morally, it is. I'm a believer in the conscious capitalist movement. Morally, it's the right thing to do. But it's way more than that. If you look at the research over the past 20 years, companies who create these kinds of conscious cultures, who prioritize people and their development, as I've just described, and think about the well-being of all stakeholders as decisions are being made, which is, I think, part of what we have to teach when we're teaching our people how to think about, manage, and balance the needs of all stakeholders in a decision. Those companies outperform the S&P by 2 to 1, 100% over the past 20 years. They also outperform the good to great companies. So this is good business. And it's something that as directors, we all need to be paying attention to.
That's some really compelling advice. So thank you so much for sharing that. Well, before we leave our time together, Christine, there are three questions we like to ask every guest that joins us on the show. So the first question is, what is the biggest difference between boardrooms today and 10 years from now?
Well, my hope is that the laws change and boards are expected to be conscious boards, meaning that their job is to optimize for outcomes that balance the needs of all stakeholders, not just putting shareholders above everything else. And the ironic thing, as I just said, is companies who do that actually outperform for their shareholders. So it's good business, but it's a change in the way boards think and act. And we're not just showing up every day and looking at the audit committee and the financials. We're thinking about the well-being of all stakeholders in the business.
What is the last thing that you read or watched or listened to that made you think about governance in a new light?
Oh, well, I just came back a week and a half ago from Austin, Texas, where I attended this 3-day Conscious Capitalist Institute seminar, summit for CEOs. And it was absolutely fantastic. We did more than just governance, but we talked a lot about governance and the things that I was just talking about here, that board directors have to go beyond caring about only the financials and the basics of numerical compensation, and move into governance of the whole company and the culture and all of the stakeholders, teaching not just the hard skills, but the soft skills, and thinking about how you fit in as a business to higher purpose and kind of to this conscious capitalist movement. It was a fascinating 3 days, and I'm definitely going back next year.
Sounds like an amazing event. Thanks so much for sharing that. And finally, Christine, what is your current passion project?
Well, you can probably tell in my voice. I mean, I'm super passionate about this topic. I was planning to retire. I didn't want another job. I didn't need another job. But I started Xapa for joy. Xapa actually means joy in Greek. And its purpose is to help bring joy to companies and their employees. And that's not like happiness joy, that is helping each person to become their best self and then bring that person to work every single day. And I can tell you, I have just learned so much myself through this whole journey. My brain has been fundamentally rewired, and I knew this stuff before, but it's changed the way I deal not only with colleagues but with family and friends. So I think it shows you're never too old to learn. The goal of Zappa is to help everyone get a lot more than money in their life, work and otherwise. We want to help everyone everywhere get filthy enriched.
Well, Christine, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the show today. This has been really insightful.
My pleasure, Dottie. Thank you so much for having me.
We've been joined today by Christine Heckart, founder and CEO of Xapa, spelled Xapa, a company that has a scalable app for employees' personal and professional development. Christine, thank you so much for being here.
Well, safe to say, Dottie, I'm obsessed with that interview. So much spoke to me, not only I think because of that, what we talked about before about the pandemic and just the new normal of life now, and what that really means, both personally and professionally. But, this idea of the grass is greener where you water it, I wrote it down when she said it. It speaks to me. It probably speaks to a lot of folks, both as a manager, as a leader inside my own organization, what more we can be doing to cultivate and engage the great talent that we already have.
Yeah, there was so much goodness in this interview. I mean, one of the things, first of all, just at the outset, I love that she provided very specific measures of the loss in productivity that you can attribute to this disengagement. I mean, it's really important to not talk about this in this amorphous, blobous way, but really to say, look, this is having a major impact on companies' ability to grow. And so that to me then does raise it to the level of a board conversation. It clearly thinking about things like corporate culture and employee satisfaction, those tend to really belong in the purview of management. But when you start to talk about this as a holistic phenomenon and something that could keep your company from thriving or from growing at the pace that it should, then it really does belong at the board table. And I just thought that was really, really helpful. I think she said 9%, a 9% loss in productivity company wide because of disengagement at work. I mean, that's major. Any 9% cut at your company, that tends to, show up in an earnings call. So
It's interesting when you think about too from a strategic and honestly from a budgetary perspective, some of the conversations, executives and board members are having this time of year in particular, is where are you investing and what does it mean to truly invest in your people? And how do you get that back out in, not only increased productivity, but in so many other areas as well?
right, and the understanding that we're not just talking about raising everyone's salaries, that's not, that's not the panacea, and that's not always the problem. I thought of her point about, employers and employees both want the same thing. They just start at different points and use different language. But everybody wants everyone to be fully engaged at work and to kind of show up with their true, authentic selves, their whole selves, and apply that to the business of the organization. I think that's really well said. And I think that's a really astute observation. I think that's what everybody wants. Everybody wants to feel that their work is worthwhile and meaningful and personally and professionally enriching. And so do your employers. Okay, cool. So how do we get there? And I think she laid out some really practical steps to help companies and in particular to help boards ask the right questions and help the company create a very conscious culture. I like the idea of the conscious currency, that employees are looking for things beyond just pay. That's a really interesting concept, and I think a way forward out of this haze that we seem to be working in these days.
Absolutely.
Well, Megan, that wraps up another episode of the Corporate Director Podcast, The Voice of Modern Governance. Again, I'm Dottie Schindlinger, and I've been joined by my co-host, Megan Day. I'd like to say a few special thank yous. First and foremost to our amazing culture-conscious CEO, Christine Heckart, podcast producer, Kira Ciccarelli, the team at Oxenfree for making this podcast a reality, and most especially Diligent Corporation for sponsoring this show. If you like our show, please be sure to give us a rating on your podcast player of choice. You can also listen to our episodes and check out Inside Today's Boardrooms, presented by Diligent Institute, a weekly web show covering best practices for today's corporate boards and committees by going to diligent.com/resources. Thank you so much for listening.
You've been listening to the Corporate Director Podcast. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to learn more about corporate governance and tools to help directors do their job better, visit www.diligent.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.